All right, we're back on MorningLine talking politics, national politics, what's happening in Washington, D.C. over the last 24 hours, 48 hours. With us is Professor Thomas Schwartz. Good to have him with us. Good morning to you, sir. And we've got more phone calls for you. What do you say? Let's go to Ann, who is waiting through the break. Ann, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Ann.
Two questions. On January 6th, there were two people that were MIA and were probably with Donald Trump, and that would be Kayleigh McEnany and Mark Meadows. If witnesses are allowed, would those two individuals be allowed as witnesses, or are they protected by some type of immunity? Because one made a mass exodus a week before the end of Donald's term, and the other stayed true to the very end, and both of them were with Donald Trump on January 6th and could testify to how he was responding throughout the entire day. And my second question is, since he has been found guilty, is that not opening him up to civil lawsuits by any of the senators and or House of Representatives that were there the day of the insurrection? And that's my question.
Oh, thank you, Ann. Now, keep in mind, he hasn't been found guilty in the Senate, but he has been impeached in the House. What do you think? You want to answer the first or second question first?
Well, I think I can do both.
Okay.
It basically is the case that it'll be interesting to see if the Democratic prosecution in the Senate decides to call witnesses. My own sense of this is I think they want to make this a relatively quick trial, and that calling witnesses could turn it into a much longer issue, especially if those witnesses try to invoke some type of executive privilege on their advice to the president or whatever. So I think that's an interesting challenge, and it'd be interesting to think if they do call witnesses, because I do think, as I say, that the Democrats want to do this relatively quickly, and they think that the evidence is so overwhelming from the president's speech that they don't need necessarily to call witnesses as to his state of mind or his behavior.
Yeah.
The second point, he's not been found guilty, so the lawsuits can't proceed. And I think unless he were found guilty, I don't know that they would be able to consider lawsuits necessarily.
Now, aside from that, there may be other lawsuits and possibly criminal charges being filed against him in the state of New York. We did see, I think a couple days ago, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that a certain charge against him they threw out, I think, was that with regard to him perhaps profiting from individuals staying at his hotel while he was president, or profiting from the presidency is what it came down to, correct?
Yes, that's the emoluments clause, and that had been brought against him and had been sitting in courts and now was dismissed.
I didn't read the whole opinion on that. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, and I think maybe presidents one way or the other sometimes, and especially as businessman president. I mean, anyone who doesn't think he didn't profit from the presidency is a fool. I mean, now whether it was legal or not, it's a different process, but it definitely, at least while he was president, I think helped him. Did it not? I mean, what was the rationale there? I mean, if you're not going to hold someone accountable, what good is that law?
That's a good question. The law itself has many loopholes, and effectively the court decided that it wasn't really sustainable to prosecute him for it, that there was enough leeway within that as to what a president is able to do, and that Congress has not been clear enough on it. So they decided to let it to dismiss the case. Okay,
all right, makes sense. And like I said, I don't know. I mean, you can profit, and it may be legal, but I know that's what that law was all about. And you're right. But that went away. But that certainly doesn't mean. I mean, I'm just wondering. His legal troubles, I think, are just about to begin. I mean, now I'm not sure that he'll be held accountable for all of it, but I think he's going to have his hands full, and his attorneys will as well. Let's go next to Barry. Barry, good morning. Hi, Barry.
Yes, I'd like to take and make this statement and everything to y'all. It's just like this. I advise everybody to read the Constitution. Don't take and give opinion on it give what the Constitution says. The Constitution takes and states that the matter of impeachment is to remove the president. The president has already been out of office, and for the House to take and bring an impeachment towards someone is ridiculous. It is unconstitutional, etc. And furthermore, for everybody to take in and put it forth around the 1800s on that case, I believe that person was still in office. The President Trump, former President Trump, is not in office. So therefore, the House of Representatives, they have violated the Constitution and that. And I would like to take and have some statements on the manner of what repercussions can come against the House for taking and impeaching someone that's out of office.
Okay,
now,
okay.
If they wanted to take a civil case, it's one thing.
Right. No, I hear you. Barry, let me ask you a question real quick, and then I'll let the professor address your question.
Let me re-answer to your questions, okay?
Okay, yeah. I'll let you. I have a question for you. I'm just asking a question. I hear what you're saying, and I'll let the professor address that. But the other question is, how do you feel then? I mean, once a president has run and then lost in the race and is no longer going to be in office as a lame duck for that 2 or 3 week period before the inauguration, if he's not held accountable for his actions as they're trying to now, does this set the precedent that any president in those final 3 weeks can do anything and just get away with it without any accountability?
Let's say, for instance, I can't hear you.
Oh, I can hear you. Go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay. Let me say this to you. In the time that he is as President of the United States of America, these things can take place. Mm-hmm. But they presented it, yesterday, the day before, the impeachment thing? Well, guess what? He ain't in office. So therefore, they have lost their window of time to impeach the President of the United States. And also, the Senate has not the right and authority to take and judge him.
Okay, Professor, go ahead. I mean, he's just repeating himself there, and I hear his point. So go ahead. Yeah. Do you want to address that and whether they have a right? And just try to explain that.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but my lawyer friends tell me this is a disputed question. The Senate did, in fact, in the 1870s, continue to impeach a cabinet officer who had resigned. That officer was actually found not guilty and not actually convicted in the Senate, but the impeachment trial went ahead. But there is disagreement among lawyers, but in the end, what I am persuaded by is this is ultimately a political question, and if the Senate decides to go ahead with the trial, they're going to go ahead with the trial, and the Democrats do have the votes to go ahead with the trial since they control the Senate. But it is a disputed constitutional question. There's not unanimity, but they will probably go ahead with the trial. And in fact, there is some precedent for holding an office holder accountable. In this case, I think the impeachment did take place within the time the president was still there. The real question is whether you could have the trial of a person who's already left office.
Yeah, and that's a good point. He was impeached while he was still president for a second time.
That's right.
I'm curious, in short of this, if someone, going to the question that I was asking Barry, wants to hold a president accountable for something he does in the remaining few weeks of his presidency, he's gone pretty quick, but let's just say he does something awful, and I'm not saying this president, any president, does something awful the day before he leaves office, but then now he's out of office, so hey, you can't do anything. I mean, are there other ways that I guess former President Trump could be held accountable if someone makes the argument he was responsible for that insurrection?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is there is this notion that the 14th Amendment actually allowed the one that prohibited Confederate office holders and people who had sponsored insurrection could be banned from office, and that is something that some legal figures have floated, it's probably not going to be able to be used because of its specific elements to the Civil War. But the other would be a censure resolution. And some did suggest that a censure resolution of President Trump could have achieved much greater bipartisan support. So there is the other option of censuring the president, which of course has no particular legal enforcement beyond the symbolism of it.
Sure.
But had it gone through with bipartisan support, it might have had greater weight.
And outside of that, could conceivably the family of, say, the officer who was killed in that riot, could they sue the president civilly?
They could probably attempt to suit civilly, but I don't know whether it would. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but my sense is that it would be difficult to necessarily create the chain of causation that would be necessary to actually achieve a settlement.
Gotcha. All right, let's go next to Ed. Ed, good morning. Hi, Ed.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning, Professor.
Morning.
Okay. All right. Now, what I'm going to read for folks here is Article 1, part of Section 3. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on an oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. I'll get back to that in just a minute, Nick. Judgment in case of impeachment shall not extend further than removal from office and disqualifications to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, and profit under the United States. But the party convicted nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trials, judgments, and punishments according to law. Now, most folks think they have to have 67 members up there to convict him. Not true. It says 2/3 of members present. Now, I think that they may have been that man that resigned from office. So did that Senator Blunt here from Tennessee resigned because he got caught with dealing with the Spanish, trying to bring Tennessee area under Spain. Now, when he resigned, Thomas Jefferson said, "This is over." In those days, there were a lot of members that were still alive that signed the Constitution that was there. And so what I'm saying is they can't try him, but from what I read, he can be indicted, I guess civilly, for crimes that maybe that he has done.
Okay. We kind of touched a little bit on that, but I mean, a lot of people reading this Constitution, and look, the Senate is getting, their legal advice there, and what they're doing. Look, it really is a moot point anyway. I think you're right, Professor, when you said earlier, this is going to be more just to try to highlight the president's conduct at the time he was president, the day of that riot and insurrection, just to highlight it. But there's not the votes there anyway to convict. So it's just not happening. It's a moot point. It's not going to occur. But he's going to be under a spotlight for a few days here where they're going to bring up a lot of things that I think are distasteful, and he'll be associated with it. And that's maybe their purpose here. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think the purpose is to discredit the Trump brand as much as possible and what Trump represented. And I think that is probably the goal. There is this sort of larger thing about whether they really do want to prevent him from running again. But I think the overall purpose is to make it clear as much as possible to as many Americans as can be persuaded that Donald Trump engaged in behavior that was high crimes and misdemeanors as the Constitution defines it. Yeah, and they'll go that way. So it's all on appearances and how that plays out, as opposed to the possibility of an actual conviction in the Senate, which I think is incredibly unlikely. Listen, we'll take a break on that note. When we come back, we've got Howard and others on hold as we continue to talk about national politics. We'll also touch at some point here before we wrap things up on some of the executive orders and the way presidents use them and the power of them and whether or not it's too much power. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is a Storm